Prison is a scary place, and although it's designed to rehabilitate criminals and lead them to live a better life, this isn't always the case. Some people actually get worse when locked behind bars, and take any opportunity they can to attack an officer, cause a riot, or kill a fellow inmate. Now, I'm sure you have zero intention of ever ending up in prison, but if you did wind up locked away, these 5 criminals are the last people you would want to share a cell with. As always, sit back and enjoy. Charles Bronson. Michael Gordon Peterson was born on the 6th of December 1952 in Luton, England, and grew up to become Britain's most violent prisoner, who most will know by the name of Charles Bronson. Remarkably, despite spending most of his adult life in prison, Charles has never actually killed anyone, and the majority of his crimes have been committed while in prison. Bronson's first stretch of violence was in 1974, when aged just 22, he was sentenced to 7 years in Walton Jail Prison, where he began his reign of terror. He was soon in the punishment block for an unprovoked attack on 2 prisoners, which continued throughout his sentence, causing him to be moved between different prisons several times. It wasn't long before he gained a reputation as being a very challenging prisoner, who spent many months in solitary confinement. After a move to Wandsworth Prison, he attempted to poison a fellow inmate and dig his way out, and was transferred to Parkhurst High Security Prison on the Isle of Wight, where he befriended the notorious Cray twins. After a failed suicide attempt in 1978, he was moved to Broadmoor and then to Rampton Secure Hospital. However, Bronson could not accept the regime and company of highly dangerous and disturbed inmates, and after trying to strangle child sex murderer John White, he was transferred back to Broadmoor. In 1987, he was briefly released, and this is when he changed his name to Charles Bronson. He soon reoffended, but the trouble was, most prisons refused to house him due to his reputation. He was basically too violent for prison. He soon ended up back in Parkhurst, where he was attacked and had to spend time in hospital. Bronson was released for a second time in 1992, although his freedom was short-lived, and while on remand in Wood Hill Prison, he took a librarian hostage, demanding a helicopter, an inflatable doll, and a cup of tea. Bronson got given an additional 8 years and was put into isolation. This didn't help, as he soon took a deputy governor hostage and had to be placed in the Hannibal cage at Wakefield Prison, the cell designed for Robert Maudsley, who we will talk about later in this video. His next move was to Hull Prison, but again he attacked a prison governor. After a few more prison moves, he ended up in Balmarsh in 1996, where he took 2 Iraq hijackers and a fellow inmate hostage. This incident added another 5 years to his sentence. Over the next few years, Bronson took another 2 people hostage, as well as destroyed prison furniture, and eventually received a discretionary life sentence. In 2009, Bronson had parole refused, and an appeal to the then Prime Minister David Cameron for his release was turned down. Thomas Silverstein. In 1971, at the age of just 19, Thomas Edward Silverstein was convicted of armed robbery and sent to San Quentin Prison in California. After serving 4 years, he was released, but shortly after was rearrested and charged with another armed robbery, for which he was sentenced to 15 years. Whilst in prison, Silverstein developed close ties to the white supremacist prison gang, the Aryan Brotherhood, and when fellow inmate Danny Atwell refused Silverstein's request to serve as a drug mule, he brutally murdered him and was sentenced to life without parole, to be served at USP. However, this conviction was later overturned due to the unreliable evidence by jailhouse informants, although it wasn't long before Silverstein killed again, this time DC Black's prison gang member, Robert Chappelle. In 1981, the leader of the DC Blacks, Raymond Cadillac Smith, was transferred to the same prison as Thomas. This was a recipe for disaster, and after repeated attempts by Smith to kill Silverstein, the tables were turned and Silverstein and fellow inmate Clayton Fountain brutally murdered Smith, stabbing him 67 times with improvised weapons, before dragging his body up and down the walkway in front of the other prisoners' cells. After this murder, Silverstein received another life sentence and was kept in virtual solitary confinement. However, in 1983, when being let out of his cell for a shower, he was handed a homemade knife by another inmate, and stabbed correction officer Merle Klutz. Just a few hours after this killing, the inmate who had helped Silverstein kill Klutz used a similar method to kill another officer, Robert Hoffman. Silverstein was implicated in both murders and sent to USP Atlanta, where he was placed in solitary confinement with a no human contact status. After the Atlanta prison riots in 1987, Silverstein was moved back to Leavenworth, where he spent the next 18 years, before being transferred to the Supermax facility ADX Florence in Colorado, where he remains to this day. His earliest date of release is 2095, and he is currently the longest held prisoner in solitary confinement within the Bureau of Prisons. Rebecca Butterfield. Rebecca Butterfield is not only a danger to herself, but it's believed her self-mutilation is to draw people towards her so she can inflict violence on them. Butterfield's life of crime started when she was just 21 years old, when she was convicted of malicious damage, drug offences and unlawful entry, which progressed on to more serious offences. In 2000, she stabbed her neighbour who was trying to stop her self-harming. Butterfield was convicted of grievous bodily harm and sentenced to 3 years. However, while serving her sentence, she killed fellow inmate Blue Slim Ward in 2003 and was convicted of manslaughter, adding 12 years to her sentence. During her time in prison, she committed a catalogue of violent acts, mostly against herself. These included cutting her own throat on 4 occasions, trying to hang herself, setting fire to her cell and severely burning herself, as well as inserting items under her scalp and head, then butting the wall until she caused skull damage. In addition to this, Butterfield stabbed an officer in the face and threw boiling water and urine at other officers. In 2015, Butterfield had served her sentence, but in an unprecedented move, she was deemed too violent and dangerous to be released, and the Supreme Court ruled that she must spend another 5 years behind bars. In summing up the reasons for this decision, Justice Stephen Rothman claimed an unsupervised Butterfield was a risk, and would more than likely commit a serious violent offence. He also noted that her suicide attempts were a deliberate and premeditated attempt to lure officers into her cell so she could attack them. It goes without saying, she does not share a cell with any other inmate. Butterfield, who is thought to be suffering from a combination of mental disorders, is currently held in Silverwater Women's Correctional Centre in Western Sydney, Australia, and she is considered New South Wales's most violent inmate. Robert Maudsley. Robert Maudsley is a British serial killer who is responsible for the murder of 4 people, 3 of which were committed in prison. In 1974, while working as a rent boy to fund his drug habit, Maudsley strangled one of his clients when the man showed him pictures of children he had abused. He was convicted of the killing and sentenced to life imprisonment in Broadmoor Hospital for the criminally insane, with the recommendation that he should never be released. However, when Maudsley and a fellow inmate, David Chessman, found out a patient was a convicted child molester, they took him hostage and slowly tortured him to death over a period of 9 hours. Maudsley was convicted of manslaughter and sent to Wakefield Prison, but he was furious with this move and made it clear he wanted to be returned to Broadmoor. In 1978, he lured wife killer Salney Darwood into his cell, where he stabbed and strangled him, before hiding his body under the bed. He then unsuccessfully tried to lure other prisoners to his cell, and when they refused, he went looking for a victim, eventually cornering off prisoner Bill Roberts, before hacking at his skull with a makeshift weapon and slamming his head against the wall. It's alleged that Maudsley then calmly walked into the prison officer's room, handed over his weapon, and told them the next roll call would be too short. After the incident, Robert was considered so dangerous that a specially constructed glass cell was built to house him in the basement of Wakefield Prison. The cell resembles that used in the Hannibal Lecter film Manhunter, and like I just said, was later used to house Charles Bronson. Robert Maudsley stays in his cell in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. Behind his solid steel door is a small cage encased in thick perspex, with a small slot at the bottom where food and other items are passed to who is considered one of Britain's most dangerous inmates. In 2000, Maudsley was asked to be allowed to commit suicide, and also requested a pet budgie. However, both of his wishes were denied. John Mongrel. Now, John Mongrel was South Africa's most dangerous prisoner. He was sent to Pollsmoor Prison in Cape Town at the age of 14, with an initial sentence of 9 years. But almost as soon as he arrived at the jail, he wanted to be a part of the gang culture, and to prove his worth, he killed his cellmate by stabbing him through the heart. At the time, he had not yet reached his 15th birthday. Mongrel rose through the ranks to become the brutal leader of the 28th gang. As the head of the pack, Mongrel would order anyone who wanted to join to kill a prisoner or warden to prove they were worthy. He would either participate in the killings or sit there and watch. It's thought that over a 30-year period, he was responsible directly and indirectly for over 1,000 deaths inside Pollsmoor Prison. In 2006, Mongrel gave an interview for Ross Kemp's TV series Gangs. In the interview, he described the killings and told that he raped a different inmate every few weeks, and anyone who did not obey him would be killed. Ross Kemp described him as the scariest man he had ever met. Now, I cannot find out for certain, but it would seem Mongrel was killed shortly after the Ross Kemp interview, and it was rumoured his participation in the TV show was the reason. So that's 5 incredibly violent and brutal inmates from around the world. I would like to take this opportunity to ask that if any of you have ever been in prison, what was your experience like? Perhaps you could share some personal stories that may deter people from committing crimes and ending up in prison. I hope you've enjoyed, and as always, I will see you in the next video.